All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. We appreciate you guys all being here. What we thought we'd do today is talk a little bit about the book, not only the story and about the guys in the book, but also about how we came about the book, how we found the story, and how we actually put it all together. And sort of, in a way, wrap up what it all means. Even now, even though the battle was 2 years ago, it still resonates to today, to events that are happening right now, and the reasons why things happen in the book are still happening now. So with that said, before I get started, completely open for questions. If you have questions, even in the middle, just jump up and ask them, because if we can get a good conversation going, it's just as good. But let's start from the beginning. Essentially, Mitch and I at the time, I was working at the Associated Press, and I was covering Fort Bragg for them. And I was told by the U.S. Special Operations Command about this story, about the Shock Valley. And at the time, they were going to award 10 Silver Stars to the team members who took part in this mission. And the Silver Star is the third highest medal for valor. And it's also very rare you see 10 Silver Stars for the same event. So of course that piqued my interest. And I went up to Fort Bragg and I did a bunch of interviews with the guys. I was one of the first reporters to talk to them. And as we get into the story, you'll realize that this story there was just something about the team. There was something about the mission, and there was just something about the story and what happens that I couldn't shake. And after I wrote the story, it got widely played all over the country, but it stayed with me. And Mitch and I had been talking for a long time about doing a book together. I had already I was getting ready to leave the AP to go to Afghanistan for 10 weeks, and so we were looking to work together since I was going to go. And this book just sort of landed in our laps. It was just a story that we felt compelled to tell because it was just much bigger than all of us.
I think one of the important things as an author, or even as a journalist, is telling a story, and that's really important. And so when Kevin came to me with the idea about turning the Battle of the Shock Valley into a book, I said, wow, let me do some research. Let me read, about the battle. And I called up Kevin's story. I looked at what had been written because this was a major news event. This was covered not only by the Associated Press, but by the Washington Post. And the story went out all over the country. And why not? It was a heroic mission. You had 10 men who were caught in this battle, and they earned 10 Silver Stars. And the Army said that this was a mission that disrupted the enemy in the Shock Valley. And you have to understand where the Shock Valley is. It's this remote province. It's a remote area in northeastern Afghanistan. And it's a place where, when we started doing our research before we decided to do the book, where even the Soviets didn't venture. This was a really remote part where no one had gone really before. And we looked at it and we said, why were they sent on this mission? Because before you start a book, you're always doing your due diligence, you're always doing your background to try to find out more about it. And when we read, what had been written, and Kevin had interviewed some of the soldiers, we said, wow, this is a really good story. But the key to telling any story is getting the cooperation of the people who are involved. So after we decided that this would really be a good book, because this is a story the American public should know about. I mean, this is a heroic battle involving special forces, going after, the enemy deep in this remote, valley. We called some of the soldiers to ask them, would they consider writing a book? Would they consider being part of a project to, tell what happened? And at first they were reluctant. And we didn't know why, because, there had been so many stories written about it. But there had been so much publicity that I think we thought at the time that one of the reasons was they were they didn't want that much publicity. These guys are elite soldiers. They're doing their job. They didn't really want any credit for what happened. And so we continued to call them and ask. And finally, we had a meeting that was set up with some of the soldiers, including Sergeant Scott Ford and Luis Morales, who was an integral part of the team, John Wayne Walding, and we met at Scott Ford's house. And we talked about what we wanted to do, that we wanted to write this military narrative that brought the battle to life so people could see really what happened there, the heroic acts. And they weren't sold on the idea at first because of all the publicity that had surrounded the battle. They didn't want any credit for it. But finally, after that meeting, and they looked at what I had written and mainly talked to people who knew Kevin, because Kevin has been embedded so much and has a terrific relationship with Special Forces. They said, look, we'll let you write the story, but there's only one thing. We want you to tell the truth about what happened. And, you know, as a journalist, as both of us are journalists, we thought, tell the truth. Well, of course we're going to tell the truth. But they said, no, we really want you to tell the truth, what happened, you know, during the mission. And that's really intrigued us because we thought the story was about the battle. But as we were soon to find out, there was more than just the battle that went on.
Okay, so it's kind of how we wrote the book too. I could pass it back and forth, but let's. All right, so we talked a lot about how we got to the story. Let's talk about the story. What we keep saying, the mission, the battle. Let's talk about a little bit about the battle. The Shock Valley, like Mitch mentioned, is in the northeast part of Afghanistan. It cannot be more remote. It's as my mom sometimes says, it's off where God lost his shoe. I mean, this valley is a cul-de-sac that goes nowhere, and it's up near the Himalayas. So getting up there is hard. Flying helicopters is hard. The only way in was by foot or helicopter. So trying to get there initially to plan the mission was tough. And what they were up there to do is go after what they call an HVT, a high-value target, by the name of Haji Ghafoor. And this guy was a HIG commander. The HIG are a terrorist group, essentially, that has some association with Al-Qaeda, has some sort of truce with the Taliban. But these guys they're nasty characters. They're a lot of foreign fighters, some Chechens, guys that aren't really there to fight for Afghanistan or fight for their version of Afghanistan. These guys are mercenaries. And what Haji Ghafoor was doing in the area was pressing people into fighting for the HIG. And he was rumored to have surface-to-air missiles and was stockpiling guns. And he was also credited with a series of ambushes in the Korangal Valley that had caught the attention of some of the commanders that were in the east. So they decided they had to go up to the Shock Valley to get Haji Ghafoor and take care of this network because it was becoming, he was able to export a lot of the violence from this safe haven. So the idea was to go get him and then take care of this safe haven. But what they ran into was, not only were they fighting the geography because it was such a hard place to get to, they're also fighting some of the restrictions that are placed on units now in Afghanistan. I'm sure we've all seen the news, right? The night raids are highly regulated. Who controls the battle space is highly regulated, and it takes a long time to get a mission planned. And one of the things they were running into planning this mission was how to get there, what the helicopters could do, and when and where they'd be allowed to go. And essentially what they came back with was the idea that they were going to fly to the valley, land in the valley, unload the soldiers, and then fly off. Now, the team initially wanted to fly up to the top of the valley, to the top of the village, and then fast rope down, which essentially like they rappel out of the helicopter, and then the helicopters would fly off. But because of restrictions, because of what the pilots were comfortable doing, they ended up having to settle for this mission, which was to land in the valley and unload their troops, which anyone who knows any kind of basic infantry tactics, to fight uphill is never a good idea. You never want to do it. That's sort of infantry 101. If you can take the high ground, you want it. So what the commanders had to pretty much reconcile was where they were going to place the risk. Was it riskier to fly the helicopters to the top of the village, or was it riskier to put them in the ground and have the guys hopefully get up the hill before the bad guys found out that they were there? So that's sort of where the team was left on the morning of the mission, which is where the book starts, where they get up in the morning and they know that they have to do this mission. It's spring in the mountains of Afghanistan. The weather has already pushed the mission, delayed it once or twice. and they all have this sinking feeling that I don't know if this is a good idea, and that feeling is one of the things that propels the